Welcome to Beast TV. Tonight, we talk with a scientist about how he goes about documenting evidence. So get you a fresh dip and buckle up. Larry Ports II, how you doing tonight?
Man, I'm doing great. I saw the sun for the first time in 3 weeks today. It's fantastic.
Can you believe we got a scientist to come on the show tonight?
I can't, but it's fantastic that he's on here. Can't wait to hear what he has to offer on the subject that he studies and the subject that we try to study.
Yeah, I kind of get a feeling he's going to feel like Mr. Drysdale explaining finances to a couple of Jethro Bodines.
Yeah, I feel sorry for him. I'm sure he's used to it.
Well, I tell you what, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guest?
All right, tonight the gentleman's name is Patrick. He is a certified wildlife biologist and senior scientist within his organization. He has a BS in wildlife ecology and management. And he goes all over the country, diving in caves, studying bats. He is recognized as an echolocation acoustic specialist, and that's hard for me to even read, much less understand what it means. How are you doing tonight, Patrick?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great.
We're doing good. We really appreciate you coming on tonight.
That's no problem.
Before we get started, why don't you just introduce yourself and give us some background about anything, maybe where you grew up, your family life, your hobbies, and anything that our audience might find interesting.
So I was born in Memphis, lived in the South for a long time, left for about 8-9 years, and came back. I've been in Arkansas for about 14 years now. Did my bachelor's and master's in the Southeast, kind of centered around the Ozarks and Boston Mountains and the Ouachitas. I live up on the upper Buffalo River, and I've spent quite a bit of time out here doing the work that I do, which kind of centers around endangered species and documenting populations and various taxa. And I spent a lot of time sitting out in the woods by myself at night, probably about a decade. So I know these areas pretty well from Missouri on down to southeast Oklahoma.
That's pretty cool. So you kind of have dabbled a little bit with the interest of Bigfoot. Can you tell us about your thoughts on Bigfoot?
So as a biologist, it's hard for me to think that there is something so large out there that we have not yet discovered. However, dealing with the species that I deal with, their new species are being discovered, about every month. As far as bats go, we've got over 1,400 species now. When I started doing bat work, we had between 1,000 and 1,100. So new things are being discovered every day. I'm a pretty big advocate to keeping an open mind on things, just because we haven't been that deep in the earth, and sometimes there's some pretty remote areas that we find some fairly interesting things.
So you said you spent many nights alone out in the woods. Have you had any interesting encounters that you can't really explain, or?
Most of what I found out there, strange noises, weird going ons, usually are attributed to foxes for the most part. Anybody who's done any kind of soundscape stuff at night knows that foxes are have a really wide variety of screams and calls throughout the year. So nothing pointing to bipedal ape in the woods, but I had one weird experience in all of that time where something strange happened across a field. Sounded like a rabbit was getting killed. Made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and then something flew over the treetops, pretty close. And
Yeah.
the only thing that I could think that it might have been was a black hawk with the muffled drive that some of those things have installed on them. But I've heard those too, so I'm not so sure what that was. But once the sound went away, the adrenaline stopped pumping, so it was very strange.
Right. Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
definitely.
Most of the time when you're in the woods, you're out there at night. What's it? We find that a lot of times people are unable to ground themselves and let their imaginations run away with them. What's what's some tips that you might be able to give to keep yourself grounded?
You know, for the first couple weeks of doing this a long time ago, starting out, it was a little strange sitting out there alone, miles from anybody. But after a while, just observing everything that happens, watching shrews bounce around, watching bears fall on their faces, just different things like that, you kind of start to realize that things are just kind of going about their business. Just sitting there quietly, listening to things or observing things is, it's always kind of kept me calm, just because everything that I've seen out there has been, explainable up until this point. Um, and then smartphones came along, and I had something to do. but because but it's you just have to sit and listen. There's nothing out there that's necessarily coming after you. So I've had close encounters with bears out there, and they're just curious, looking around, trying to figure out what you are and why you are there where they are. So, um, but after a while, you get used to it, and we always hear stories about unexplained things and unexplained disappearances, but I would venture to say those are very few and far between.
So you spend a lot of time, like you said, studying bats. So you spend a lot of time going into caves and doing this and that. Have you found any weird things besides the bats in the caves?
So I have not found anything too crazy. Actually, the other day I found a possum skin pulled inside out, which I thought was a little bit strange.
Yeah.
Uh, Weasels typically do things like that, but I didn't know weasels could wrestle possums. Although I guess it's possible. But I have read quite a few accounts in Arkansas of people going into caves and finding things. We've got the blue people over by Cushman Blowing Cave. We have the Garo monster legend over up in Boone County. Um, we have the lizard people encounter from Army veteran. I don't know where he was because he wouldn't say. But so there's all kinds of interesting little tidbits out there of things that happen underground. But I can also tell you that going underground, if you're not well prepared, um, can definitely play tricks on you too.
Yeah. there's all kinds of gases and other things that can strike you down pretty quick if you're not careful.
Yeah, there's been a couple instances where I'd be standing there breathing really hard, just standing there, and then realize what's happening. And guys, we got to leave. Like,
Right.
there's no oxygen in here. So,
Well, it's good that you realize that.
yeah.
So, do y'all have equipment to test for gases or anything? Or
It's not typically a problem here. Most of the caves in the Ozarks and Boston's, they have airflow from another place some way or another, or
right.
cold air is falling downhill, kind of sinking into them. So usually not, but there's a couple.
Yeah.
When you go into the field, what equipment do you usually carry? Do you carry any type of recorders or where you can amplify to actually pick up the bat vocalizations?
So yeah, we use some specialized equipment to record bat calls. So as they echolocate through their environment, trying to find prey or just trying to navigate through the dark. So we use recorders that have ultrasonic microphones, and there are attachments on these recorders to also put audible level microphones. So anything that's under 5-6 kilohertz where we can hear it, which have been typically used for recording birds during the day, or some night birds and other vocalizations that we would hear. So, doing what I do, we spend a decent amount of money on this gear. With the gear itself individually, it's not that expensive, but when you have 10s and 20s and 50s of these things, it does tend to get a little bit expensive. But they're really high quality. You don't have to worry about reverb from your microphone with your gain up and things like that. So they're a really good way to capture clear animal calls and during the day and at night.
I see Eric just asked a question, and this is a great question. What's the deepest that you have been in a cave?
So in Arkansas, we have a couple limestone formations. We've got the Boone and the Everton, and they're about 400 to 450 feet deep. But you're looking at a lot of from the mountaintop down. So our caves here, we've got pits that can be 160 feet. And then you can kind of go down from there a little bit. So maybe a couple 100 feet. But when you get out into Tennessee and that kind of karst, you're looking at 300-400 foot drops, and it just kind of keeps going. There's an account over in Independence County where there's a cave or a crevice that drops and drops and drops and just keeps going for miles. But outside of that general account, nobody's ever been able to find that opening again.
I know you said you avoided Kentucky, the Mammoth Cave area.
There's a lot of me there. There's a lot of people like me who have all that covered.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Do you want to hear about the microphone recording equipment that we use in more depth?
Yeah.
So I went to a conference a couple years ago, which is where I met one of your producers, and I listened to a lot of talks about taking out voice recorder microphones and putting them out in the woods at night, recording calls and bringing them back and comparing the calls to known calls, people creating their own call libraries of animals, and which is kind of what I do. However, there are some shortcomings. Those voice recorder microphones have a lot of reverb because they're cheap little microphone inserts. And so the calls that were being played back to me sounded like they had a lot of reverb, and that messes with the overall call quality of the vocalizations, both from your call library and from your unknowns. So we got to talking about what it would be like to have a higher quality system. And I know the idea is to blanket as large of an area as possible to record vocalizations as cheaply as possible, because, like I am also always contending with funding, which is, non-existent. So, but the recorders that I use and that can be used in this regard that have audible microphones are from Wildlife Acoustics, and they just came out with a new one, zippy little thing. It's $750, so it's a little bit expensive. But listening to the calls, I was wondering if it would be better to have one high quality system that you move around from time to time, as opposed to blanketing an area with multiple low quality systems. So uh, that's the biggest expense in everything I'm about to talk about. But the calls that you get from that are super high quality. There's no interference, there's no extraneous noise. Like, it is recording that. But once you get into the audible spectrum, you have other things. You've got cicadas, and you have, if you're too close to a road, you have road noise from cars. If you're on an ATV trail, especially if you're in Oklahoma, you have recorded 70 UTVs rampaging past your microphone. So there are some things like that that kind of interfere with recording calls. But this kind of equipment is expensive for a reason. It's because when you plot all of this stuff on a spectrogram and look at it, you are seeing what's actually happening instead of seeing a lot of interference as well. So when you are recording on an SD card with a voice recorder microphone or a Wildlife Acoustics unit, there are some programs that you can use that will allow you to look at the calls. So I got the impression that some people did just listen to the calls in playback mode, but when I do bat echolocation analysis, I'm looking at calls on an XY graph. So the two programs that you can use that are actually free, the Wildlife Acoustics has a Kaleidoscope Pro, and it has a spectrogram viewer that's free. The classifiers for bats and birds are not free, but the viewer itself is free. And then there's one called Analook, ANALOOK, that is free as well. And you can manipulate your calls within that program to a very large degree. And not only that, if you know that program well enough, you can write your own filters. So you can say, I want this minimum frequency or that minimum frequency or maximum frequency. I want this slope to my call structure, or I want to look at calls that are 2 seconds apart, 2 milliseconds apart, 5 milliseconds apart. So there's all these parameters. So if you know that you have foxes and bears, but you're looking for something specific, you can tool it to make it look at exactly what you want to look at. And it's a little bit of a complicated program because it's free. There's a lot of buttons and a lot of things going on, but it's one of the ones that I think I use more than any other, even the ones I pay for.
So let me ask you this, since I'm a dummy. So you're saying you can load 6 hours of audio that you recorded out in the woods, and this program, once you get it set up, will scan through that audio and find what you're looking for?
If you set it up correctly. It takes a lot of trial and error, but right. you can set it up to scan for certain frequency ranges or anything that you've identified that's a parameter in what you're looking for.
Man, that would be great if I could get somebody to set it up for me, because I get so sick of listening to the audio.
Yeah, but that's how I
hear.
Yeah. But you've got to be able to look at, if you have a known call library, you have to be able to recognize visually what your knowns are as well as, your flying squirrels, your shrews, your foxes, your coyotes. Like you
Right.
have to be able to visually recognize those and know that you're looking for something different.
Right.
And in the audible spectrum, it's probably not going to be perfect because there's a lot of things banging out around in the woods, and a lot of animals have a huge range of calls. Um, I'm I find new call structures all the time that my animals are making, and you're just like, well, where did that come from? And
Right.
things you've never seen before, and that will apply to every animal out there.
Hmm. Let's talk about, give us your thoughts on infrasound.
So I don't deal a lot with infrasound um, with the animals that I study.
Right.
But with infrasound carries over a very large or long distance rather, because the lower you go, the longer the wavelength is, and that's how sound travels further. Lower frequencies travel further. So that's why um, whales are able to communicate over vast distances through water, is because their sound is so low. So, but as far as what we're using um, this stuff for, we don't deal with infrasound a lot. And they're on these spectrograms and things like that. Recording infrasound would be, well, with the microphones, recording infrasound could be possible, but the parameters that you would use within these spectrogram programs would be a little bit different, because you wouldn't be able to visually see that on the XY graphs. You would have to look at some of the other parameters that are in there, most likely. And that's actually an interesting question. I'd like to see if that would work.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
So,
so
no, go.
in the natural state here in the United States, what would put out infrasound naturally? Anything?
A lot of what I would think would come from infrasound would be natural things like rock fractures. I don't know if you've heard of the frost quakes before,
Yeah.
where water is inundated, fills up cracks, and then you get these loud booms. And where I live, we get loud booms all the time,
Yeah.
traveling really long distances. As far as animals go, I am not coming up with one, because I would think that the animals that we have here in the eastern deciduous forest would make, if they did do infrasound, they would do it close quarters. Um, just producing that's got to take quite a bit that I can't see the anatomy of some of our animals being able to produce.
Right.
Are there any instruments that we could use that you know of to record infrasound and to be able to look at it on a spectrogram?
Hmm. There is likely some sort of instrument. I would probably be going into the realm of geology at this point, but there could be some sort of um, trying to think of the name of that unit that they use to detect small vibrations. There's a piece of equipment that geologists use that kind of records micro level earthquakes. So, like, if you want to know if something's happening because you are going to drop a tower onto the edge of a cliff, and you want to know if it's transferring underground into a cave, it's like a mini seismograph. It's a magneto something. But I think something like that would be your best bet, because actually, Wildlife Acoustics used to sell a hydrophone that would record super low frequency noise. And if you bother them enough because they've stopped quote unquote making it, if you bothered them enough, they might sell you one. But that would have to be attached to one of their units. It's but I think if you looked into hydrophones and hydrophone recorders, that might be your best bet, not getting super technical with mini seismographs.
There you
Interesting.
go. Are you writing this stuff down?
Yep, I'm writing it down. I'm going to have to go back and watch this podcast again because
I get it.
Jethro Bodine.
Yeah. Patrick, one question's going on in the chat here. They're saying, does a wild turkey, when they're strutting, spitting and drumming, is that infrasound?
That I don't know. I don't know. With birds, we're definitely audible for the most part. I don't think I've ever gotten close enough with a microphone to a wild turkey to know if that was the case or not. But
I've got close enough with a shotgun.
Yeah, it's usually if you're close enough to a wild turkey, it's already dead. So that's a good question, though. I don't know.
All right. Well, I didn't mean to throw you off. They were just debating it there. And I have heard the spitting and drumming, so I thought I'd ask an expert.
Yep.
Let's see. Mr. Vax2 asks, is infrasound between 10 and 20 hertz?
Generally, I would say yes. There's some variation in that as well, because humans can hear down to, some of us can hear down pretty low. So I would say that that's a decent range for considering what infrasound would be.
Yeah. Humans pretty much have, 20 to 20,000 hertz that the human range can hear normally?
I'd say probably to, I'd say 16 to 17,000 hertz probably, if you're really good with your ears. But yeah, I would say somewhere in that range. But some things, with infrasound, it's one of those things you have to be cognizant of, because you might be hearing it but not knowing you're hearing it, but you can feel those vibrations still.
Right.
It's still moving liquid in your inner ear. So it's, I think you could probably perceive infrasound even if you're not hearing it necessarily, if you haven't screwed up your ears with loud music and loud noise.
Well, unfortunately, me and Mark both have.
Yeah, I'm losing hearing in one of my ears due to airplane headset static. So
We got a bunch of cave questions.
okay.
Have you ever heard voices in the caves besides
Not
your
that
own?
Not that weren't my own or somebody else screwing around. No.
Have you ever been in Carter Caves in Kentucky?
No, I have not been in Carter Caves, but I do know people who have, so I haven't heard anything too out of the ordinary from them about it yet.
All right. Bama says for his psychology thesis, he spent 5 days underground. What's the longest you stayed in the dark? And then he says, and Lord, why?
I've done overnights in caves, but not 5 days. So there are some caves out west, like Lechigia and things like that, where people do spend days or weeks, down under. But 5 days, man, that would be tough. That would be really tough.
Yeah. have to be a coffin lid shut on me to stay underground 5 days.
Yeah, after about 8 hours, I'm ready to see some sunlight.
Yeah.
It's like, please let me die under the sky.
Let's see. Heather asked, I thought alligators and pigeons used infrasound.
That's possible. Alligators being mostly aquatic probably do have some infrasound characteristics to their communication, I'm sure. And then for pigeons, I do not know. Pigeons do make some pretty low frequency noises. I know that, but I'm not sure about infrasound. But you could be onto something, especially with alligators.
Yeah. Let's see. Dan Ricky asked, do bats use ultrasound to stun prey?
Not to stun them. It's mostly just to find them. And I can give you a pretty decent example. I was in Jasper in a parking lot at 2 a.m. watching two red bats try to find this moth under the streetlight. And moths have evolved these scales that kind of deflect echolocation, like stealth technology. And they kept diving for it, but missing it. And the moth was just flying around doing moth things. And finally, one of those red bats keyed in on it, grabbed it, slammed it to the ground, didn't even eat it, and then flew off. Because it
Wow.
was just so mad at it. It was just like, I'm going to end you, but I'm not even going to bother eating you. So, but no, bats just strictly to navigate their environment, find prey, and then there's some limited social communication with their calls as well.
All right. Heather asked, in your experience as a wildlife biologist, have you observed patterns with moon and weather that is common across species?
Yes, moon phase is very important. So if you observe deer kind of on the roadside, you'll kind of see a little bit more activity towards the road in different moon phases. Lots of animals tend to find cover in bright moon phases. Some are the exact opposite. So there is a predator prey interaction with moon phases, but you can't discount also that things go wonky when there are full moons, because we know that happens with humans. It does seem that sometimes there might be a little bit more activity as the moon's gravity is pulling on us a little bit more activity in the woods. What was it? It was moons and moon phases and what else?
Weather.
Weather. Yeah, and another thing about weather, doing these surveys for different species, they know things are coming way before I know things are. So if I didn't have radar, which when I started I didn't, things would be so quiet you were wondering if you were in a bad spot, and then several hours later you were getting murdered by lightning and wind. So they definitely have some sort of extra perception on incoming, probably barometric pressure, things like that.
I agree with that.
Okay, Thomas Potter. This is kind of a two-part question, and one would be opinion. Which animals can utilize echolocation?
So where we are here in the eastern US and mostly in the west as well, of course there's bats. Excuse me. There's also flying squirrels, several species of flying squirrels, shrews, some deer mice, possibly, and I think that takes the bulk of that, or what echolocate here.
Okay, this is the second part, and so this would be just an opinion, but I'm going to read it the way Thomas wrote it. Do you think a Bigfoot or Sasquatch can also have this capability, knowing that they have been recorded using clicking sounds during low light conditions?
Well, inferring from an animal who might not be able to see well in the dark, I would say that using clicks is kind of a precursor, possibly, because if you're recording clicks, they're usually in the audible spectrum. So evolutionarily, that would be an animal using something to navigate in their environment near to them. So if they're walking through the forest, they're trying to see if they're about to run into a tree or things like that. So that would indicate to me that it would be more likely not an evolved trait yet to get to an ultrasonic frequency if they're using audible clicks to navigate.
Well, speaking of that, you've seen the blind guy riding a bicycle and he learned how to click. Is that similar to bat, or did he learn some other deal with the sound?
That's what they do. The pulse rates are varied so that the return is different based on things near and far or interference from other noise. So it probably did come from, just the basic premise of echolocation. And it's pretty cool. That's a pretty neat skill. I've tried to do it in the dark too.
How did it go?
Not well. I think I need a little practice.
It's pretty amazing. I didn't see the guy make any mistakes, and I'm sure he did early on, but he's evidently got pretty good at it. All right, Mark.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Con Squatch asked, wasn't there a disease that killed many bats?
Yeah, so the white nose fungus kind of interferes with their hibernation, so it kind of eats them in the wintertime because they're in torpor and they have no immune response. So the fungus grows on them because they're a living medium, and it bothers them so much that they can't drop their body temperature. So they basically, before winter is out, they'll starve or dehydrate and die. So that's killed millions of bats and pretty much extirpated one of our species completely almost. So we do have a lot less of those bats, but the good news is some of the other bats have compensated because there's more insect abundance out there. So we have many more of other species, at least in this area. That's not true for everywhere.
Well, we definitely need more down south to eat all the mosquitoes.
Oh, they're coming. They're coming to visit you. They're expanding their range your way.
That's good. We need them. I know a lot of people don't like bats, but they are very, well, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but they're killers.
They're useful.
Yes, definitely. All right. Paranormal Heart Podcast asks, are flying fox a variant of bats or simply a different species?
So if you look at it taxonomically, we'll go from the top. So Chiroptera is the order of all bats. Megachiroptera are the suborder of all of the flying foxes and what we call megabats. So those are the daytime flying, non-echolocating, giant-winged, giant-eyed bats like Mariana fruit bat or flying foxes. And then most of everything else that's typically smaller and has different feeding strategies are microbats. So they're microchiroptera. So they're related, but distantly. Same order, which is 3 tiers down from the top.
Right.
Okay. Heather asked, do you have to get vaccinations for your research? Do you get bit often? I think that's what she's asking.
I do get bit. So I wear gloves, but it doesn't always stop anything from biting me. So I do get vaccinated, like in the U.S., vaccinated for rabies, and then if I travel abroad, there's all the other vaccinations that you're required by going to other countries. But for me, rabies is the biggest one. So it's a pre-exposure, and it's usually just depends on your biology whether it's good for a couple years or 10 years, but you have to get that checked. Because everything wants to bite you: bats, flying squirrels that you catch, anything that's out there, rattlesnakes that you might have stepped on, things like that. So
What's the most dangerous situation you've gotten in the dark or in a cave?
it usually involves one slip of the foot and you're going to die.
Right.
That's most of that. I climbed a waterfall the other day to get into a cave entrance, and it was one of those situations where if my one foot, which was my only hold on that rock, slipped, I was gone. But I've again, going back to the rattlesnake thing, don't kill them, because when you kill loud rattlesnakes, you are selecting for rattlesnakes that don't rattle. And then I step on them and then they get pissed off and try to bite me. So leave them alone so they can do what they do.
That's good advice for most wildlife. If you
Yep.
can leave them alone, leave them alone.
Okay, Con Squatch ask, this is regarding your other comments. Why are bats expanding in the South?
So we have a couple species that are very generalist, um, and they've historically had ranges that are a lot smaller than they are now. So there's it's twofold. So there's an absence of other species because they've been knocked down so bad due to white nose syndrome. But then there's a climate change. So with the species that have been kind of knocked back from white nose syndrome, we have a southern expansion going into the higher terrain areas, like southern Appalachia, like down in Alabama and Tennessee and things like that. These things are going south, east, and north. And then we have other bats due to climate change that are going further north. So the warmer it gets, you can watch them every year. Just you'll get records further and further north because they can handle the winters.
Hmm.
This is going to be a good one. Dan Ricky asked, is there any frequency in ultrasound that would cause humans to be uncomfortable or cause sickness in them?
That's a good question. Probably. If you look at the warfare development that we have using sound, both high frequency and low frequency, I would say absolutely. Um, because you can't think, and with an onslaught, but the thing behind it is there has to be amplitude, there has to be high power behind it. So an animal typically is not going to be able to make something with a high enough amplitude to do that to you. It has to be kind of electronically amplified for to get that bad. Although I've watched some infrasound videos on the internet that I think would be very disconcerting if that ever happened around me.
Right.
So
in your opinion, if a Bigfoot were to emit an ultrasound that would cause you to be nauseous, disoriented, would this sound be audibly heard easily, or would it not be?
if it had a high enough amplitude to do that, I bet there would be an audible component to it. I'm sure there probably would be. I think it would blank out. Like if you looked at something like that on a spectrogram, I think it would blank out the entire spectrum.
Okay. Because a lot of people that say they've experienced infrasound say that they really didn't hear it, but it caused them to be nauseous or disoriented and all that. So you're the
yeah.
sound expert, so that's why I wanted to ask that.
I can see that because I already have problems with that. If something's too loud, especially on the low end of the spectrum, I get nauseous just from that vibration in my inner ear. That's probably due to some tick diseases over the years as well, but I can definitely see that being the case in loud infrasound.
Okay.
Let's see. I'm not sure what Heather's asking here. Do you know, Larry?
Well, I think she's asking if there is a concern with bats spreading the coronavirus, or I believe that's what she's asking.
Okay.
Yeah. So everybody always looks to bats with good reason because over the years they've been excellent reservoirs for viruses, so they can hold them, but they're not affected by them. Rabies being a pretty good example for the most part. Like they're not going to ever survive it, but they can hold on to it for a long time. But here in the US, we've not really ever had any evidence of bats being a reservoir for these novel viruses like SARS or MERS or Nipah or coronavirus. So it wouldn't really happen here. However, like there is, if you're going to go roll around in bat guano, there might be a little bit of concern with low level viruses like maybe like hepatitis A, things like that. I'd wash your hands, but not here being a reservoir for that. That would be a long shot.
Let's see. Pappy Two Bears asked, would you consider going out with Bigfoot researchers?
Yeah, I'd actually would really like to do that if we can get to a place where there could be some pretty good activity. Because I will tell you, if I did go out, I will explain away a lot of things, and so
You'd have to get in line.
Yeah.
We do that.
But no, I that would be a really good time. I would definitely consider that.
How would you explain away something getting thrown at you in the dark?
If something threw something at me and I looked around and everybody I knew about was accounted for, and I lifted my night vision and I didn't see another human running around out there screwing with me, then
Right.
yeah, that would be something that I would go, that's a problem.
Let's.
While you were out in the woods, have you not heard any wood knocks or any vocalizations that you couldn't put a finger on, or
No.
in your mind, what would cause a wood knock naturally?
So naturally, you're talking about that double knock. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or single, or
I mean, I don't know a ton about, kind of what they might do, but so what bears will do, I don't know if anybody's ever observed a bear feeding, but sometimes they'll knock to get grubs to kind of listen for cavities in trees. And then if there's logs on the ground, they'll come up and push. They'll come up and just pounce on it to break that log up. So there's a little bit of knocking and a lot of pounding done by bears. Also, it's not typical. I don't usually have woodpeckers feeding at night, but every now and then I've seen one out a little bit at night. Some of the other birds that are out at night, owls, goatsuckers, things like that, I wouldn't really consider them doing anything that might cause a wood knock. So I think the biggest culprits would probably be active bears in the area, and they're quiet too, because you might hear them pound on something, but you will not hear them walking around.
Yeah.
right.
Okay, Marquis asked something, and it's something that I haven't ever heard or even thought of. She says there's a theory that whales use sound to transmit images, almost like a packet transmission. Do you know anything about this? And if so, do you think this theory applies to other species?
I've not heard of this theory, and I'm trying to think about what that may look like. So, when you are dealing with a mammal with a larger brain structure, um, not really a marine biologist, but I it's one of those things that is possible. I mean, you probably don't know what's lighting up in a whale's brain as things are coming to it and how it perceives the sound, but it's possible, I guess. But I'm not really familiar with it. And as far as other species, I would think that I would think that especially in the ultrasonic spectrum, getting away from the lower spectrum, that uh, it's more of a quick communication thing. Words, I would think it would be more of like a language thing as opposed to a picture thing in the
Hmm.
ultrasonic range, if that was the case.
All right. Spencer Jameson asks again, what's the oddest thing that you found in a cave? Maybe something besides the inside out possum.
Like people's underwear.
Yeah.
So I really think because there's nothing out there that I've seen that is just kind of an unexplained artifact or anything like that. I've had people ask me about Casey Jones's gold, but the weirdest thing I did see, and this just comes back to humans, of course, but I walked into a cave, and it's a pretty long cave, and it's not one you want to be wet and alone in, but there was like a path of clothes. So there was like a shoe and then a sock, and later on there was pants and then a hat all the way through this cave, which really started to freak me out because there could be somebody back there still like 2 years ago. So it was just like a stream of somebody's belongings that were just going deeper and deeper into the cave. So yeah.
That is weird. I'd have left.
Mhm.
I don't want to attack by a naked man.
Well, another thing that is weird in caves. While we're on the subject, turkey vultures and black vultures like to nest inside of them. So if you come up on a cave entrance, sometimes you'll hear something hissing at you, and like it'll start off real low, and it'll end in a hiss. So there's a lot of weirdness around turkey vultures, and it's probably where dragons came from to begin with, because they are the most menacing things in the world to hear when you're inside of a cave.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Okay, Thomas asked, did you ever see the photo the cave explorer took of a long exposure camera showing a family of Bigfoot? I don't think I've seen that. Have you, Larry?
I have not.
I haven't either. I have seen a long exposure of a Bigfoot like apparition from somebody that I know, which was a little bit weird, but I have not seen that photo.
We might have to search that on Google.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen any strange lights while in the woods?
I think I have. It's one of those things where you see something far off and there's nothing around out there. Uh, but I probably just kind of wrote it off as like, oh, there's people hiking on that side of the valley or something like that. So I've not seen anything that's like a gas light like the Dover lights, but I have seen some lights where I'm just like, well, whoever that is, I hope they stay over there and away from me. But it's just one of those things I didn't think too much about.
Right.
Hmm. All right. Rick from Wood Booger Farm, he wants to know if you have seen any critters in caves that did not have eyes.
So we do have several species throughout the Ozarks and Boston's that have kind of lost their eyes. So they might have photoreceptive cells or vestigial eyes and things like that. We've got some cave crayfish. We've got Ozark blind cavefish, things like that. And there's different species that kind of radiate out into Missouri and Oklahoma and things like that. But so that's what happens though. If something gets washed into a cave system and it somehow survives, eventually over a long, long time, it will lose its eyes if it's staying in there. But I've not seen anything unexplained that should have eyes that doesn't.
Hmm.
All right. American Cryptids ask, are you familiar with the Melba Ketchum's DNA analysis? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
I've only encountered that anecdotally. By anecdotally, I mean my dad telling me, "Here it comes, the proof is coming," and then I've never followed up on it. I've heard a lot of people speculating one way or another, but I've not read enough to talk about this in any sort of knowledgeable way. But that was mentioned to me not too long ago too, and I do remember thinking that I need to go look into that and see what happened there.
Well, I'm not going to skew your thoughts on it. We'll go on.
Okay, Mike Stinton asked, and this may not, we'll address this one to Larry. Except for intimidation, do you think rock throwing is ever meant to kill? Ever any
Well,
reports of it?
Larry says that if they wanted to kill you with a rock, I believe they could. But I do think they do it to scare you, to intimidate you. But I don't think they physically want to harm you because I think they could hit you right between the eyes with them if they wanted to.
You know, I've got. Can I follow up to that?
Sure.
Yes.
All right. So, looking at every kind of display that's ever done in the animal kingdom, this basically every species in order to attack, that's very energetically expensive, and then that could cause damage, and so then you have to expend more energy to heal if you can even survive. So everything in the animal kingdom is mostly intimidation unless something literally wants to eat you for food. So
Right.
there's a lot of posturing in every animal. Like I've had bears do it to me, but when you run at them, they run away. So they don't want to get into it. They just don't want you around. So I would think that would apply broadly to most anything, unless they want to eat your face off, which is a different story.
I agree.
Okay, Cheryl Humans. Now, maybe she joined us a little late. She's asking why you go into caves, and she follows up by studying animals. But let's kind of turn that around and ask, how long have you been doing research into caves?
I've been doing cave work for about 10 years now. And I go in to document populations. So cave taxa and biota. So it could be anything from salamanders to bats to fish, anything like that. So, but we have programs in multiple states that deal with endangered species, threatened species, species of concern. So, in order to evaluate the population viability over time, because the goal is to delist these species someday, we have to get counts. So, I'm basically going in and being the count on Sesame Street and just counting things. So, finding them and counting them.
What are some of the endangered species that you've been in to count?
So the Ozark blind cavefish is a threatened species. We do have some cave crayfish throughout the region that are considered special concern or are state listed. There are several species of bats that are endangered. Um, Most everything else is, some of them are species of concern, but a lot of them are species, especially invertebrates, that haven't even been described yet. So, like, we've got people who are in there actually describing new species constantly of cave harvestmen or different little aquatic born invertebrates and things like that. So, but we've got several endangered ones throughout this middle region here, and then the same applies to Appalachia. And it kind of falls off as you go west because there's just less caves. But anything that's in a cave is usually somewhat of a sensitive species, as it were.
Hmm. Spencer Jameson, this is a good question.
Are you sure Spencer's asking it?
Yeah.
Okay.
What equipment do you suggest for recording, observing nocturnal species on a budget?
If any.
So, we come back to the age old question of quality versus coverage. But if you want a higher quality microphone, you're going to have to pay for it. And in the audible spectrum, it's a little bit better, but it's a little bit easier to come by. But those little digital voice recorders aren't meant for high intensity or long range recordings. But it's gotten to the point now where you can get high quality microphones, and if you look on, I'm trying to think of it. It's kind of like a mini boom microphone. Something like this long that just has that felt out. It's something that protrudes out from it, and so you can probably go and find these kinds of microphones and attach them to, that are attached to a standard recording apparatus that has SD cards. But there is one that I'm thinking about now that you jogged my memory. But there's a company called Audio Moth, and they're about to release a little thing like this that is basically a microphone, an SD card, and a computer chip. And they've always had the ultrasonic version available, but I think they're about to branch out with a new one that's audible microphones, so birds and things like that. I bet it's under $140. I bet it's probably about $100. It might actually be $30. They haven't come out with the pricing, but the little audio moths that we've used in the past are they're $80.
Hmm.
So I would think that would be, because I've read a little bit on it, and it does seem like it's not as high quality as that $750 unit that I was telling you about, but it's leaps and bounds over something you're going to find at Walmart.
Right.
So something to look into.
I tell you what we use a lot of us do, and I was just going to run it by you and see if you was familiar with it, and that is the Zoom H2N recorder.
Well, let me look and see what that is, because I am not familiar with it.
It's got the YK microphone, records in the wave format, and it's
so that's another thing too. Speaking of wave format, it would be a good practice to stick with that. If people start branching out with different kind of formats, cross-platform wave formats are the best way to go for different spectrograms and programs like that. Yeah, I've not seen this. I still am a little nervous about these implanted microphones that are kind of implanted into the whole system. That aren't detached. I would have to look at some of their specifications to see about how well this one actually does, or have somebody send me some recordings from it. That would work too.
Sure, we can do that. It was really developed for musicians. So where you could actually like lay down a drum track and have it as close as, like a digital track, and then you can come back on top of it with your bass and then your guitars and so forth and so on. But they have a lot of clarity, and it seems like anytime if you're just using a regular MP3 recording, you have to do a lot of filtering, and every time you do filtering, you lose that clarity that you had with the original recording.
So if that thing has good clarity for overlapping musical tracks, especially concerning things like bass, then I would say it's probably a pretty good microphone. And as far as filtering noise, one thing I always tell people is, you're right. Once you start filtering, you're losing the bigger picture. You're isolating sound that you want to look at, but you also have to keep in mind that you have a bigger picture outside of it that you might be cutting off.
Right.
So, and that's why that analog program is great, because when you run the filter, you can turn the off dots back on so you can see highlighted the sound that you want to see, but in the background you have the noise or the stuff that's not filtered. It's still there and you can still see it. It's just a different color. So it's pretty neat.
We use the Audacity program mostly, and then whenever I run a spectrogram, I usually run it on the Sonic Visualator, and it gives me a whole lot clearer picture.
Yep. I mean, they all serve the same function. But I think the most important thing is being able to compare knowns to unknowns to isolate what you're looking for, and knowing at the same time that animals have such a wide range of calls. You could be out there for years collecting reference calls and probably still not get the whole breadth of what that species can do. So I think in the end, it does come down to hard experience. Like, you have to spend time at this stuff in order to become comfortable in your knowledge of different animals and the sounds they make.
Yeah, we keep a pretty extensive library of known animals, and it's just something that it's just like with foxes. Foxes make over 200 different vocalizations, and so it's just like what you're saying. You really have to know your animals out there.
Yeah, and not only their individual vocalizations, but vocalizations in tandem with other conspecifics or ones of their species interacting with each other are also like a whole new breadth of noise that you only see certain times during the year. And the other thing too is juvenile animals, birds, mammals, anything, make the craziest noises because they haven't figured out how they're supposed to call as a species.
That's
A
right.
good example is a barred owl. Has a very distinct call. We've probably all heard if we've been hanging out in the woods at night. But I had a juvenile one time scream at me like a dying woman in the bushes and right by my head. And that was actually one of the other times I was really freaked out in the woods, till I realized what it was later, hearing it try to turn that screech into something that might resemble a barred owl. But it did sound like somebody was getting murdered in the bushes. And but you have stuff like that that's totally out of the blue during certain times of the year, where it could be a juvenile fox, it could be a juvenile barred owl, it could be all kinds of stuff, and you only see it during that time, and it's never consistent because it's just trying to crystallize its song or figure out how to communicate.
That's interesting.
But let me ask you this. We always look at hertz range on a possible booger or Bigfoot vocal. Is it possible for a coyote or something to have damaged vocal cords or some type of injury, that the hertz range from their call will change.
Yeah, I would say that that's entirely possible. Anytime there's some kind of damage, it will definitely shift that entire. I think what you would see is fragments of what you would normally expect to see, with just some weird interjections. So maybe lower amplitude or lower hertz than what else you would normally see. So and I would think that coyotes would probably be more apt to do that, considering how they fight and where they go for.
Right.
So, but I would, and one of the things in my research or surveys is like I try to key in on certain characteristics. So if something is doing something crazy, either it's completely outside of its frequency range, I'm still looking for structure, or if the structure's messed up, I'm looking for like slope of the calls, things like that. So you always need to try and key in on one or two things that might be that telltale species ID.
Right.
Yeah.
That's always the one thing that concerns me when I come across a vocal on audio, and you want to say that it's in that range of a possible booger, but there's so many other things that could happen to cause something else to be in that range.
Yep.
Well, that puts us back at square one.
Well, let me follow up with Ohio Valley Sasquatch. He asked if the Zoom H1N is comparable to the H2N. And it is. The H2N's a little bit better recorder, but they are well, just let me say the H1N, I would rather have that than a $40 recorder from Walmart.
All right. Do you want me to ask the Dan Ricky question to Patrick now?
No, I think Dan was
Patrick
kidding.
Dan wanted to know if you keep your hair cut short to keep the bats out of your hair. Dan's a joker.
I just had that conversation yesterday. We were joking because it's a big myth about bats and hair. Except I shut it down because I watched it happen one time. I released a bat and it flew right into somebody's hair because they thought it was a tree.
Right.
It just hung there, looking around like what's happening. So,
yeah. See, Mark, Dan asked a good question.
Yeah, he did. Okay.
Let me ask you this. Excuse me. You probably have not seen this show. It came on a few years ago. A friend of mine, well, I know him. His name was Bill Brock. He had a show on the Travel Channel, I believe, that was called Monsters Underground. Did you ever see that?
I've heard of that, but I've not seen it. But I have heard of it because I think that was one of the shows that was mentioned on this chat room that I found myself at 1 a.m. in the middle of the woods one night looking at. So
they took different local cryptids from the area that supposedly lived in caves or whatever, and they would actually go spelunking in these caves and set up stuff, and which it was produced like most find a Bigfoot. They'd leave you hanging on some noise or something in the cave, whatever. But what's your thoughts on the plausibility of something living in inner earth and coming out through the cave systems?
So there's I've mentioned this before tonight, actually, in Independence County. I've not found it this year. I looked a little bit, but I never found it again. But there's a journal, like a handwritten journal of the guys that just went and they kept going and going and going, and then they say they encountered the blue people, and then like somebody stayed behind, and like I've seen it, like it's handwritten. It's
Yeah.
photocopied and posted on the internet somewhere.
Right.
And so, but like, if you look at the geology of this area, I just don't see it happening. But then again, what do I know? Like, you know, maybe they did. Maybe they did traverse 3-4 miles of interior crust and then pop out in a tunnel. I hope they did. That would be awesome. So, but I will tell you that I knew the landowner of that area, and she's passed away since, but she's got a lot of Indian in her background, and years ago she had a stroke, and so she was always very boisterous and just in your face all the time, and she had that, so then she was very quiet. But we were discussing that one time in her living room. It was us and her husband and her. She was just sitting there, so we were discussing it, and she looks at us because she hadn't even paid attention to us for an hour, and she goes, they know you're there before you even get to the cave, and looked at us and then went back just to kind of staring off. And we were like, oh God. It could be true. So,
Well, I bet your
yeah.
next trip to the cave was kind of creepy then.
Oh, a lot of people are in and out of that area, but according to lore, this particular crevice is not part of that system. You have to look elsewhere in that valley for it.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I had to go there, so.
Okay. Thomas Potter asked Larry, what is the hertz range of a Bigfoot high pitched scream?
Well, I'm going to defer that to my audio expert, Mark Newell, because I defer all that to him.
Usually, when we see something like that, it is in the 800 hertz, and it will start off around 750 hertz and go up to close to 800, and then drop back down to about 775 hertz if it's just a high pitched scream.
That was better than what I would have said. All right. Heather asks, Patrick, what's your most terrifying experience in a cave? Have you ever went? Well, just tell us what your terrifying experience in a cave is.
Well, it's mostly just things like when you realize where you've stepped, and then later you look at where you stepped and you're like, well, I could have died. That would have just fallen over and killed me. Or things like unstable rocks. But one time, one of the guys that was with us, we use black lights sometimes to look at the white nose fungus on bats. So he brought a mask in, skull mask that's glows in the dark, that's charged by black lights. So he ran off into some far corner, charged that mask, and just stood in the dark in the corner and just silently just stared out. And so he made a little noise, and everybody looked over there. And I almost had to change my pants because I was not expecting to see that over there in the floating head in the corner. But
yeah, that would have been.
Yeah, and I mean, with caving, there's a lot of, it's just a lot of contending with rock. I remember one crevice I was stepping over. It was about 70 feet down, and there was a chert layer, which is a kind of eroded limestone. It's hard but very brittle, and you have to step out onto this chert over this chasm to get to the other side. And that was probably my most terrifying moment, because I was like, at the time, I was like, I am a 260-pound human being, and I'm going to fall through this chert. But I didn't. And then next on the way back, I took a running leap over it. So,
What kind of precautions do y'all take safety wise on going in the caves? I know probably most of the caves you don't go far back in, but how do you keep from getting lost? Do you do something to keep from falling in the caverns?
So our caves typically aren't very complicated here. Some we do have some maze caves. If I feel like I'm gonna lose my way, I'll drop a glow stick or just put a bright eye in a rock or something like that.
Yeah.
But we've got knee pads, elbow pads, helmet, extra batteries, extra lights. I usually carry a trash bag with me because if somebody gets wet and disabled in the back of the cave, it's a good way to keep people warm. For rappelling into caves, I mean, that's a whole other suite of equipment you have to drag up a mountain to get in and out. But and then a satellite transponder goes off on the outside so people know which hole we went in before we go in. So just kind of common sense stuff.
Yeah.
Extra food is useful as well. Not drinking the water, so bring your own. So there's a cave in Arkansas that it's a beautiful creek. It's one of the most beautiful hikes in the state, and at the top there's a cave, and in the summer there's 25,000 bats crapping in this cave down the walls into the stream in the cave, out the waterfall, and down into the stream. And I've seen people drinking from it, and I was just like, you are not smart. So yeah, bring your own water.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Cons ask, what's the strangest human encounter you have had in the woods?
Well, that takes me back to West Virginia. So, well, actually, a couple of years ago, a guy was unloading his rifle at us here in Arkansas for no really good reason, since we were on federal land. But a lot of my encounters that are strange have to do with people who have been doing drugs for a long time. I met a guy out in the woods hiking wearing a pink dress.
Larry, he found you. You in that ballerina dress.
I've yet to find anybody like lost or confused out there that we weren't already looking for. So, but if you want to see some interesting things, coal country is where you need to go observe people.
All right. Marquis the farmer ask, are bats all on the same frequency, or do they have individual voices, and can others pick up on signals from just one?
So different species have different frequencies. They're all that species are typically on the same frequency level, with some variation, because when you get bats with the same frequency, all of them in one area, they obviously have to either vary their frequency or their time between calls, or the duration, or the pulse rate, so that they know it's their noise coming back to them and not some other bat. So yeah, there's as some bats have become pretty much extirpated or eliminated from the landscape, the frequency ranges have expanded. So they've kind of filled those niches as we've gone along. So typically one species has a certain kind of call and a certain kind of range with some variation, but that's changing now a little bit due to like the changing species composition on our landscape. What was the last part of that question?
Well, let me turn my phone back on. There's the answer. Are they like individuals, and do they pick up signals from just one? And you answered it pretty well.
Yeah, well, another thing that's interesting is tracking bats and across the landscape over the years. It's like when they're flying around, they'll hear a friend, and they'll be like, "I'll follow them." And so a lot of my band returns have in my radio tracking, I can only conclude that they were like, well, that guy sounds cool. I'll go live with him for a while. And they just kind of
Okay, we're like 85 minutes into this, so we don't want to overstay our welcome with Patrick. So we're going to try to wind up these questions. American Cryptids would like to know if you ever found evidence of early humans in a cave.
There are substantial archaeology sites throughout our region. We've got a lot of historic Osage artifacts and bluff dwellers. So I would say almost every cave in the Ozarks that is of substance where a human could easily get in has probably been used at one point or another. So some of our caves in Arkansas do have cave paintings, and we actually have some very interesting, like furthest east cave paintings of these certain types, and those sites are hardcore protected and gated. Um, and then there's some that aren't, but they've been working to, because there's still a lot of plundering going on, and the artifact plundering as well as just crazy damage to like a
Yeah.
natural cave system. So, but yeah, there's plenty of evidence out there for that time period. But I am not an archaeologist, but I don't know how far back it goes. But um, there's definitely a lot of Osage artifacts out there.
All right. Ohio Valley Sasquatch wants to know, what is your choice of footwear whenever you're entering caves and running around in them?
So that's been a constant debate for years from all of us. So we have to decontaminate our shoes from our decontamination protocol for the fungus, so we don't track it in anywhere else. So it's pretty hard on your shoes. So it's kind of a half and half between how much do I spend on footwear and how long it's actually going to last. So I basically, when I retire a pair of field boots, they become cave boots. But I typically end up with something along the lines of a Merrill or a Solomon hiker, something like that. That's got those kind of grippy outsoles that'll grip rock a little bit better.
Okay, Thomas asked, does 5G affect bats?
It does.
Yeah, I've been waiting for somebody to do that kind of study. Um, I'm sure. I'm sure somebody will probably start doing that this year if they haven't already, just because there's a lot of urban environment interaction bat studies that are out there that are there more and more every year. But if they affect us, they'll affect bats
Yeah.
for sure.
So no bats have been seen running into a tower or mass kill-offs or anything since they've turned on the 5G.
I haven't seen anything indicating that, but 5G is usually kind of just in the middle of a city at the moment. That'll probably, I mean, that'll change as it expands, but then we'll probably start hearing some things.
Right. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
Let's see. Have you ever turned out your light in a cave to see how dark it was?
Yeah, I do. I do turn out my light. If somebody goes down a passage and I'm waiting for them just there because I'm too large or whatever reason it might be, yeah, sometimes I just turn off my light just to see like how it would be just to do that all the time. And then like if we're taking a break on a long one, I mean, just obviously to conserve battery power, sometimes we'll just try to find our faces with our food, with our lights off. So
W-
That's where glow sticks are helpful though, because you can just crack a glow stick. But
yeah.
I don't always have those with me.
What what headlamps do you recommend?
So I typically use for short duration caves, just like you're caving for the day or whatever, and you're going to come out later. I use zebra lights. They're super bright. They're rechargeable. If we're talking like serious caving, like Croatia,
Uh,
but I also use Sten lights here. But Sten lights are bomb proof, but they're only 500 lumens. But you can look into things like um, El Spilio or Skirion. Their El Spilio is a $500 lamp at 2200 lumens, and Skirion's a $1,100 lamp.
wow.
It's a little bit dimmer, but I will say that I like that color of that LED better than any other lamp. I don't own one because it's $1,100, but I wish I had. But zebra lights are $90. You can buy the rechargeable batteries for $20, a couple of them, and then you buy a $10 charger, and you have a really high quality bright lamp. It'll light up the night.
Yeah.
All right. Potter asks, have you observed the bats at Carlsbad Caverns? And do bats have to worry about predators?
So I've not seen them at Carlsbad when I've been there. Those tend to move around in seasons. I do know some researchers at Carlsbad though, so I've heard some great stories. But as far as, yes, bats have predators. If you go to a cave entrance that has hundreds of thousands of bats that are about to emerge, you will see owls start coming in. You'll see hawks start coming in. To a certain extent, you'll see, if you're in the caves, snakes will take them, raccoons will grab them. So basically anything. Wood rats, I've seen wood rats take them too as well. So yeah, they're things like to eat them. So I actually had one. I was going to check a mist net one night, and I had a bat in it, and then a great horned owl came through, grabbed my bat, didn't even stop, ripped my net to shreds. It didn't even hold it back
Uh,
at all, and just kept going and took it away.
Huh.
So
okay. Spencer Jameson asks, in your experience, does the federal government restrict access to caves to preserve the bat populations?
yeah, so there's a federal order for cave closures, and it's been effective since 2009, and it was solely due to white nose syndrome spreading. So it was to curb the spread of the fungus, but also to protect the bats during critical times as the populations decrease. So currently, it's still effective or in effect, and it's also been helpful to preserve archaeology sites, things like that. But in the interim, a lot of caves have been gated either because they're important archaeology sites or they are important endangered species sites. So we do expect within the next couple of years, hopefully, that order will be lifted and that you can go back to permit caving. You get your permit for the summertime and go have a blast, that kind of thing. But on federal land and on most state land, caves are still currently closed, but that does not apply to private land because private land is private land.
Gotcha.
So if we were on a national park or a state park, if we saw a cave and went in it and a park ranger happened to be standing there, he could write you a ticket for entering that cave?
Yes, they could. And then
Wow.
and then if it's a certain kind of cave with endangered species in it, the penalty could be up to 50 grand.
Ooh,
Wow.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't either. You could kiss your Jeep goodbye, Larry. I'm sure they would take that.
I believe so. Man, well, I'll quit my quest for cave entrances. I can't afford that.
Okay, I've got a final question here, and it's from me. And this is something that I'm hoping to gain your knowledge and insight that we can use for Bigfoot research. So, Patrick, what are your protocols whenever you feel like that you have discovered some type of evidence? What kind of gamut do you run it through before you start forming opinions or theories or anything like that? What should a researcher try to hold his standard up to?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. So, in my field, when you are publishing or doing something, it has to hold up to the method, and your study design has to be on par, and then everything is reviewed by three people who have done a lot more in that field than you have ever done it, and they get to decide if it's worthy or not, and to go on and sign off on it and get it published. So, and that's how most of scientific community, that's your burden of proof. Like, you had a good design, say you did a grid sampling or a randomized sampling out there, and you approached it like that, but then collecting your evidence is also important. So documenting documenting locations, times, weather conditions, the size of something that you might have found. All your photos have metadata that's time stamped, things like that. Any kind of instrumentation that you can get your hands on that'll help you out there is definitely a plus. I mean, you all know as well as I do, there's really nice expensive FLIRs and white phosphorus Gen 4 night visions out there that we'd all love to have. But you kind of got to think about it in a way that how am I going to approach a university professor or somebody in their field and convince them that this is actually what's happening?
Yeah.
And so, and a large part of that is you have to think, when you find something, like, what else could this possibly be? And ask around, because if you're going to come forward with something and somebody can shoot holes in it, they will. Absolutely, they will.
Right.
And so you have to have already thought about every possibility. And when they're like, well, where's your photographs? Well, did you somehow take a cast of this, or do you have the actual evidence? And did you preserve it correctly? If it's biological, did you put it in ethanol, or did you not put it in ethanol, depending on the kind of analysis you're going to do with it? And so you have to anticipate the biggest a-hole that you've ever met is going to try to shoot holes in everything that you do, because that's what we go through all the time. So,
Right.
but you have to think about every angle, and I mean, enlist your friends and enlist other people who might have expertise in that before you come forward with it.
That's the beauty of the Bigfoot community. There's always the people that are willing to agree with you, and there's the trolls that are willing to cut your throat and watch you bleed.
Well, you know what's interesting, though, is if you gather sufficient evidence, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what anybody says. Like, that's what it is. So that's the burden of proof you want to achieve, where if 50,000 people are screaming at you that you're out of your mind, but if you have proof, you've got proof. So,
That's good advice. Definitely.
Larry, do you have a final question?
Oh, I've got too many to even start. We'll just have to get Patrick at a campfire and pick his brain some more.
I like campfires and I like beer.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us tonight, Patrick. I think there's so many things that you talked about that we can apply to Bigfoot research. And so we would just like to give you any final thoughts that you might want to say before we go off the air.
Well, just alluding to our conversation a minute ago, just anticipate that people are going to shoot holes in everything that you do, and always be aware that probably almost 100% of the time out there, it's going to be something that you can explain away. But I would not discourage you from keeping looking, always keep an open mind, because there is a lot of things that we don't know, and we are discovering things every day. So whether it applies to Bigfoot or aliens or something paranormal or anything that's just outside of the ordinary that captures your interest, just have at it. It makes things interesting.
Well, we've really enjoyed having you on tonight, Patrick, and can't thank you enough for your time. We know how busy you are, and I just hate that I didn't get a chance to talk to you at the conference whenever Shelley was talking to you, because she was so excited when she told me about talking to you.
Well, you need to convince them to put it back in the spring so I have a better chance of being able to go.
All right. Well, we would like to thank you again, Patrick. And Larry, why don't you tell us about the Falk outing coming up this weekend?
Well, I believe that is going to be at Smith Park in Falk, Arkansas this weekend. I think it starts Friday evening, Saturday, and Sunday. I know they're going to have a lot of big people in that area and the Bigfoot community there supporting that. It's to raise money for the park, so future researchers can have a good, clean place to stay. I know Lauren Smith and Dustin Clark of Night Callers Radio are putting this together with Keith Crabtree, and they've got several big names coming to this to support it, and anybody's welcome to go. And I believe that covers it. I hope. If not, Lauren will send me a nasty grader.
Marco Polo.
Yeah.
Okay. We would like to remind everybody of the Oklahoma Bigfoot Symposium, March the 7th and 8th. And they will have nature hikes on Saturday for the kids. They will have night hikes for the adults that would like to go off into the MABRC research areas. It's a great event. They're going to be unveiling the OCO TV show, which is a Cherokee sponsored show talking about Bigfoot and Bigfoot researchers. And as always, Bobby will be making her Indian tacos in the kitchen, and there will be a whole lot of vendors there. And the speakers this year will be Jerry Hestang, Robert Swain, Jim Whitehead, Randy Savick, and D.W. Lee. And Larry, why don't you tell a little bit about this shindig we got going?
May 15th, 16th, and 17th, we are going to have a meet and greet at Land Between the Lakes. So we will name the campground later, and we will put up something more official on the Beast Facebook page to get people to sign up so that we'll be able to contact you with the information. But we will be getting that together here real soon to give everybody as much advance notice as possible.
Okay, do you have any final words, Larry?
Nope. I just want to thank Patrick for coming on here. I know people that are in the job criteria he is do not like stepping out on the edge on this type of subject. And we do appreciate him coming on and willing to talk to us. And hopefully we didn't damage his credentials or anything. But we do appreciate you coming on. And I mean, just alone to know to stay out of the caves, I don't want a $50,000 fine for sure. So we got a lot of good information from Patrick tonight, and we will implement that in our future endeavors.
Well, we want to thank all of our new subscribers and faithful followers. Also, be sure to check out our field evidence videos and let us know if there are any guests that you would like to see on Beast TV. And because Debbie Jones is watching the comment section. And don't forget to tap the like button and leave us a comment. And as always, Larry and I would like to thank Debbie and Shelley, Heather, Sally, and the rest of our moderators. And check out our sister channel, Beast of the Woods. That's Larry's channel. And our friends at Bigfoot Outlaws, Dixie Cryptid, Night Callers, Bigfoot Odyssey, and Hidden Existence. Thanks again to Patrick for coming on this week, and we will see you again. Same bat time, same bat channel. Night night, footers.
This has been a Sawdust production.